I always enjoyed clowning. Clowning has taken a bad name because of what they've used in my case.
When I talk about John Wayne Gacy, a lot of people ask me, did he do the unalivings while he was dressed as a clown? Yes, we believe he did, but it wasn't the main thing, and he didn't do it all the time. So let's continue our discussion about John Wayne Gacy. This is part 2, his early adulthood into his crimes. So let's get started. We talked about in part 1 all about his childhood and about his relationship with his father, and into adulthood, it didn't get any better. In 1960, at age 18, Gacy got involved in the Democratic Party. This was something that his father, again, called him a sissy for. His father was Republican, and so it very much clashed. He called him like a lot of degrading words being part of the Democratic Party, and especially working for the Democratic Party. This same year, John Wayne Gacy's father helped him buy a car, but he kept the car in his name, and it was kind of a way to hold this car over John Wayne Gacy's head, to say, I'm still controlling you. If he didn't do what his dad wanted, his dad would take away the keys and be like, this is my car, I'm not going to give them back to you. And John Wayne Gacy got smart. He started copying the keys, and his dad figured that out and started taking out the spark plugs. It was a very toxic relationship. This went on for a little bit, and then John Wayne Gacy just got fed up with his father's treatment, and so he fled. He went to Las Vegas, Nevada, and he only had like $135 or something in his pocket when he did, but he was like, I am done with my father, I just want to get away. He ended up staying with his cousin, of course, and then he ended up kind of going from job to job. He was an ambulance driver for a little while like that, and then he ended up working at a mortuary for only about 3 months. This job was a pivotal turning point in John Wayne Gacy's life. And let me tell you, brace yourself. Prepare yourself. Prepare yourself. You were not prepared. Just trust me. I was never prepared for this information. So John worked as a mortuary attendant, and he would stay overnight at the mortuary with these bodies, right? And one night he went in and crawled into a young boy's thing at the mortuary and touched and fondled this young boy. I told you weren't prepared. I warned you. Anyway, I guess this was too far for John Wayne Gacy, because he was like, I can't do this anymore. And he headed back home. He left the state and went back to Illinois, because he was like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. So after he ended up going back to Springfield, Illinois, this was the first time that he ended up with a man, having an experience with a man. I think this changed a lot of things for him, and he ended up sending him on the path. Ironically, this was around the same time that he got married. Here he was in 2 different worlds. You know, he was married to a woman, had this life, this persona that he was keeping up, and then he also had an experience with a man and maybe liked that, and had this whole other part of him that he was just fighting with, just back and forth. His new wife's father gifted him a KFC restaurant, and he ended up hiring a lot of young boys, and he would make advances, he would harass them, he would just harass these young men at this establishment. And people were starting to get really uncomfy and scared around him, but he was also a person in power, so they couldn't really say a whole lot. But at this time, Gacy had his perfect life. He had the persona of a perfect life. He was married. He, had money, enough money to survive. He had a good, from the outside, family and life. And his dad even told him like he was proud of him and he was sorry for what he did. And that, I think, meant everything to him. He finally got his dad's approval, but it was for something that he was unhappy inside being. And I think that just created this tornado inside of him. In 1967 is when things started to boil over for him. He just was not handling things correctly. He was not handling his childhood well. He was not handling liking men well, and this persona that he was creating. And it was just like this big storm inside of him. This is when he began SAing younger men. It was violent. It was horrifying. I can't imagine for these victims. So he would invite them over. He would slip something in their drinks and then force them to do things that they didn't want to do. And because he was a person of power and someone that they looked up to, he didn't get reported on a lot. This didn't get reported to people, and these victims kind of went unnoticed. He was SAing a lot of young men at this time. A lot of these people he would blackmail, he would bribe, he would say he didn't do it. He was doing everything he could to keep his two lives separate. But then a boy that this happened to, a victim, went to his prominent father in the community and said, "John Wayne Gacy SA'd me." And that's when things just started to take a turn. He ended up getting charged with SAing this kid. He did deny having to do anything with this. He denied, but he failed a polygraph, and there was enough evidence that he ended up getting charges in this. So after he went down with the charges for this, his wife left him. She took the kids. He never saw them again, and he just started a tailspin of what led into what had happened later. Gacy got out of jail in 1970, and he did not stop. He went right back to Chicago, and he got in trouble again for SAing young men. Victims of the SA often get looked over because it is such a small part of the bigger story, but these victims went through a lot. Like, he would lure them, he would trick them, he would do anything to get them in the car and back to his house. He would slip them something or convince them or force them to do acts with him. And it was violent, and it was rageful, and it was horrific. At some points, he even flashed a badge to get these young men to go with him. This is the year that he moved to Summerdale. The house in Summerdale he purchased, his mom helped him purchase, and from then on, it was like he just went crazy into SAing and then unaliving. And we're gonna see this pattern of him working up to it. He purchased the Summerdale house in 1970, and between 1970 and 1978 is when he said all the incidents of the unalivings occurred. This time, he was also putting on a persona that he was this well-liked, prominent man in the community. He was this contractor, he had clients, he was a very well-liked and very well-respected man in the community. Not only that, but there was also people living with him during this time. The few first years, his mom and his new wife and kids lived with him. Then his mom moved out, the wife and the kids lived with him for a while, and then they left and he did some on his own. But that is a big misconception, that there was also people living in this house when he was unaliving. This is the end of part 2, but in part 3, we're going to start getting into the details of the crimes. We're going to start listing some of the things that had happened to work up to that, and then we'll move on to what happened after that. So please join me for all of that. I will see you guys next time. Thank you for being here.